You guys have a lot of speakers coming to talk to you about various plants and how plants play a role in Xeriscape design. So I'm going to talk about plants, but I'm going to talk about plants in the context of all the other elements that go into landscape design. So primarily I'm going to cover patios and retaining walls, and I'll sort of talk about plants as I go along on those topics. And then I'll also cover just some pure plant information at the end of the session. So it kind of breaks down in thirds. The approach I'm really going to take is to talk to you about different construction techniques and what they entail to do this different kinds of work. So starting with patios. Really, a patio or a terrace or a deck is, the size of it is determined by how you're going to use it. So do you want to have a dining table? Do you want to sit 6 people, 8 people, 12 people? Do you want lounging furniture? That's one of the trends now, or the living room type furniture outside. So that's where you start when you think about what size patio you're going to install. The other key element in patio design is elevation. So I think the primary element that separates the girls from the women, the boys from the men in landscape design is successfully working with elevation change. Because how many, we all think about drawing plans of our landscape, but a plan is a flat piece of paper. And how many yards are actually completely flat? Very few. So when you design something, you need to accommodate the changes in grade. And those of you who are working with the designers in that hour-and-a-half session that Lori talked about, you all got some very excellent, very specific information about how to prepare a base map of your site. And this is really a hugely important step in doing a good landscape plan, from the hardscape design on through the planting. If your base map isn't accurate, then everything that flows from it is not accurate and almost a waste of time. So really take your time on that base mapping piece of the work and get it right. The other thing we always need to deal with is drainage. Where is the water going to go? Here in Colorado, ultimately all the water is supposed to go to downstream users and to Kansas, basically. And it definitely doesn't need to go into your neighbor's window wells, your window wells. Those are all bad things. And so you need to figure that out as part of your design, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Not so much in patios, but a little bit, and certainly with decks, you may need HOA approvals. With decks, anything in Denver, it's 18 inches above grade, requires a handrail. That's a safety feature. So you need to know what kind of permits, zoning issues you may be looking at on your project. So here we go. That's kind of ugly, huh? It's kind of bland. I did not design that. This is what we designed. So you can see here that picture shows the different changes in grade, stepping out from the doors, stepping down to the dining level. That patio is determined by the size of dining table those people wanted to have. Kitchen in the background there with the built-in grill. Then the fireplace separates the dining area from the living room furniture that you can see on the far right of your slide. So here we see a patio, some drainage in a patio. This is called a channel drain. So in this particular instance, this patio doesn't drain into a lawn area. The patio's low. The reason the patio is low is because of the builder, but we won't talk about that. So the water drains into this channel drain, and then it goes through a pipe, and daylights, all the water needs to come out somewhere, comes out in the front yard. So these are some of the tricky aspects of patio design, and so if you get hung up, visiting with a designer can really help you on some of these issues. Okay, so what can you build your patio out of? Probably because we live in Colorado, it's the Rocky Mountains, we all think about stone as a good patio material, which it definitely is. Stone comes in different colors. We've seen it in squares and we've seen it in random pieces, dirt with ground cover. So let's look at some pictures of all these different applications. So here in this slide, you have Colorado buff. This is a native product, flagstone, in 2x2 squares with woolly thyme, that's the plant there, growing in between it. So how do we make this? How does this happen? Well, what we do is you prepare the soil, you amend the soil underneath those stones, and then you lay those stones. Those are laid on a grid. In this case, it's random stone. It's Colorado rose. It's the stone that we're most familiar with. And then, to be honest, we irrigate those ground covers. So this one here, this first one is on laser drip. So there's little tiny irrigation lines running in between all those stones. And in this one is a pop-up spray zone. So this patio gets occasional irrigation. Doesn't need as much water as your grass, so you are saving water there, but a little bit of extra water to get it started really, really helps. Woolly thyme is kind of the standard plant that we use in patios, but for those of you who want to go super low water, a new plant is appearing on the horizon. It's called nailwort. I did forget to look up the scientific name of that before I came here, but it's proving to be more xeric and thriving in between those stones than even woolly thyme. So that's a really nice, very informal look. I should also mention this tree in the back by the fence and then the one in the foreground. That is a oak leaf mountain ash. I believe these trees were brought into Colorado from here in Fort Collins. Fort Collins Wholesale Nursery is known to be an innovator in plants. These are fantastic trees. They disease-resistant, drought-tolerant, fabulous, fabulous fall color. Oak leaf mountain ash. Not always widely available, but depends on the year. So if you want a little bit more formal of an approach to a patio, but you aren't quite going to go to the most formal extreme, the construction technique that comes from the paver industry, and I'm going to talk about pavers next, is a road-based application. So what you see, ignore that stone on the side of the slide, that's mortar set on concrete, but in the front of the slide, in front of the mallet, is class 6 road base, compacted, and then there'll be a sand setting bed, and then the stone will go on top of it. What's nice about this construction technique is no concrete is poured, making it more sustainable. Remember, every construction step you take, every material you bring in, the more complicated it gets, the less sustainable it is. It's a pretty simple principle. So here, this is on road base, and these are cut stones, so they're able to really be very close together. So there's not a lot of room for weeds to grow in between. And here's the same thing done with some buff stone in a construction shot. Little bit harder with random stone, because this stone does not come from the quarry or the stone supplier with a pattern about how to put it together. So I think it's a common misunderstanding of homeowners or do-it-yourselfers that, oh, I'll just lay down some random stone, it'll look really good, it'll be easy. Well, I can tell you when they were making this patio, those stone masons were chipping away with a chisel to get that stone to fit together exactly like that. So not so easy. And here's a view of that. I think this is the same one. I have a lot of slides from a long time ago. But you can see how hard it is to get those joints really tight. And what's growing in between those joints, you guys? Weeds. Nice. So there's some petunias that kind of, I think, self-seeded there, but it's pretty easy for weeds to grow in between there. And some people like that look. It's casual. I think this homeowner, she likes it. She's my fan on Facebook, so she doesn't hate it. But for some people, that might not be okay. So if you want a neat, tidy look and you're doing it yourself, you probably shouldn't try to lay random flagstone, even though it seems like it might be easy. Plus, how much do you think those pieces of stone weigh? 60, 70 pounds. Now, if you work in an office all day, you're probably not used to doing that all the time, right? So you might not be that good at it. Some people are. The most formal and the most traditional way of laying stone is on a concrete base. So this picture shows the forms to pour concrete, and then we're going to put stone on top of it. This is the most expensive way to do stonework. It's also, in my opinion, when I'm running a construction site, one of the most stressful ways to do stonework, because I have to get everything exactly right on those forms. Because once concrete is poured, it's poured. But here's what it looks like. Very formal, very elegant. And in this particular slide, this is a buff stone with mortar joints, and then it has a paver, the thing that looks like bricks, border. So nice, neat technique. One of the things that's nice about that border, whether you're working on gravel, road base, or on concrete, is that you see the little tiny cut pieces of stone at the edges? If you didn't have that border, then those little pieces would look messy at the edge. The border contains them. So just a nifty construction technique to make your work look more professional. And here's a close-up. This is not tile. I actually ran through these slides with my students at Front Range this afternoon. I thought I'd practice a little bit, which actually kind of made me hoarse. This is not tile. This is Colorado buff stone. We wet our pictures down. Our projects down a lot of time before we take the pictures, so that gives it that really shiny look. You can seal stone, but I wouldn't recommend it, because once you start sealing, it goes on forever and ever. So you can't really even see the mortar joints in this one, but that's what you just saw, the forms to make that patio, the concrete forms. And so this is random stone on concrete with mortar joints. So again, the masons are chipping away to get those really super small joints. You can see them there. And so that's a really nice, neat, beautiful look. Okay, pavers. If I quit being a landscape architect, I would probably go into promo for pavers. I'm really into pavers. I think they're a great material, and they're an excellent material to build with yourselves if you're looking at doing some of this work on your own. So there's basically two kinds of pavers, pavers that are made of concrete, and these are the products you probably have seen them like at Home Depot. Pavestone is the manufacturer, I think, that Home Depot carries. And then there's a wide range of concrete pavers that are more professional grade. And then clay pavers are what you think of as bricks. And I'll talk a little bit more about why they're not exactly bricks. And you can lay those on road base, which is a technique I think is awesome. And then you can also lay them on concrete. So these are concrete pavers. The manufacturer on this is Borgert. They have these pavers in Denver. I'm sure you can get them up here in Fort Collins. And these are an ashlar, so they have a variety of sizes. They're tumbled, so they have a really nice soft look. And they are laid on road base. So remember that road base slide we saw a little while ago? So the road base is super awesome because you're not pouring concrete. It's not that complicated. It's permeable. And that's hugely important because water can soak down into the ground. We're not creating as much runoff. And it also, probably the greatest limiting factor in everything we do outside in Colorado is freeze-thaw cycle, right? So remember, like, it's 70 at 3 o'clock, and by 6 o'clock, it's like 20. And then it freezes, and then it rains a little bit. And the freeze-thaw, that water getting in joints, the water, I'm pretty bad at like physics and chemistry, but I do know this, that the water expands when it freezes and then shrinks back when it's just regular water, not ice anymore, and so that moves things. And with the road base, it allows flex, but it's still strong enough that if this is installed correctly, you will not have an icky, wobbly patio in 10 years. So there's a slide of that. That's a construction slide. But you can see very finished, very professional looking. And this is something you guys can do if you're looking for a homeowner install. So here you can see some other concrete pavers. These are just plain rectangle ones in a herringbone pattern. Surprisingly enough, this pattern looks really sophisticated. The easiest pattern to lay because it doesn't run it doesn't have long lines. The lines are always interrupted. So if one of the lines gets a little off, one of the joints, you can't tell. These are clay pavers. So this looks like brick, right? And it is brick. It's made of clay, but it's fired at a higher temperature so that it can withstand all that moisture on it. Also, real bricks have holes in them. Do any of you guys know why bricks have holes in them? It helps level them on the mortar setting, and it also makes them lighter for transportation. So less material. So I love the building industry. There's so many interesting little factoids about it. So this is a great, I should have put the before of this in here. It was so sad. Here we have clay pavers again. And this is interesting because this area that has the roof on it is was an old concrete patio, and we overlaid the pavers right on top of the concrete up to where that joint is, where that flagstone mortar border is, and then the part going out where the table is on road base. And this picture was taken probably 5 years after we installed this project, and it hadn't settled at all. And this homeowner is my fan on Facebook too, so I know that if he hated his patio, he probably wouldn't be my fan. So here you can see close up those clay pavers. These are gone through a tumbling machine. So again, they have that old look. Really popular, really reasonably priced. So if you're looking at contracting out this kind of work, this is the mid-range in pricing. So top of the line is that mortared stone. I'll show you some more cost-effective options, but this is a great way to go, especially if you want an old look. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I want to mention these trees. These trees in this patio are golden rain trees. I'm bad at Latin pronunciation. Golden rain trees is good. And these are a nice lacy tree. So their foliage, here I can use a big word, their foliage is bipinnately compound. That means the foliage is like a feather. So it's light and airy, so some sunlight gets through it, but it shades, but doesn't make it dark. What's also cool about these trees is they have bright yellow flowers in July, when we think the whole tree thing is like over, right? Like trees are coming up, right? Crabapple trees, hawthorn trees. These are in July. So really great tree to use, relatively xeric, and little protection to get them started, but a really nice tree. So here you can just see more close-up of that herringbone pattern. This is really nicely modulated. You see how it goes exactly to the edge? That's good craftsmanship. And a great ground cover there at the edge of the patio. Both the Latin name and the Latin name's Prunella on this one, and the common name is Southheel. And this is a great, pretty xeric ground cover. Probably a lot of you are familiar with ajuga, which I think takes a lot of water and fries up, especially when you have it next to hardscape. Have you noticed with plants that sometimes when they're next to the hardscape, the part that's right there by the concrete kind of looks nasty? This holds up really well in more heat. So it's one of the few plants, I think one of the toughest areas to get plants to look really successful. And when you do this and you earn your living by it, the plant looks bad for like more than 5 days that people are calling you up complaining. So you gotta really produce results. And this is one that does it for me. Here we overlaid the pavers, again, on some existing concrete, and it was real old concrete in an old neighborhood in Denver. We just left the concrete exposed on the riser part of the treads. And these pavers are attached with glue, paver adhesive. And you can buy that product at Home Depot if you're doing it yourself. And they really stick. I have done this at my own house, and they haven't moved. Okay, so I didn't design that either. And here's what we put in. So these pavers it's actually bricks on the up and down part of the stairs. And then the pavers are on the tread, the horizontal part of the stairs. Now, I didn't put this in with a different contractor than my company put this in, and I'm a little disappointed with the results of it because I don't like how everything is mortar set. I wish they had used a sand set or an adhesive on those treads because I think there's too many mortar joints. It's too busy looking, and it's going to be more maintenance. But they are cool stairs. They're all perfectly radiused. Okay, patio materials, concrete. Well, stamped concrete, you can just do plain concrete, and you can do stamped and you can do stained. And so let's talk about stamped concrete first. Now, this industry would not hire me to do their promotions. And a couple things, stamped concrete, you can make a gazillion different patterns. And the way it works is you form up your concrete, you remember the form pictures? And then you pour the concrete, and then they basically use a stamper, not the ones you can buy at Home Depot. You need to do this professionally. This is not a do-it-yourself project. So they stamp in the pattern. So here we made a border. Remember I said that borders were good, they define edges. And then there's an interior pattern. And then they put powder on and then an acid on to get the colors to come out. And this is about the same price to maybe a little bit less expensive than clay pavers. And this looks pretty good. So how come I don't like it? Well, here's another one. This has some efflorescence on it. In this particular slide, there's a better slide. Efflorescence, by the way, is that white fuzz. Have you ever seen that on anything that's built with concrete? Maybe a year later, 6 months later, that white fuzzy stuff comes out. See that there? That are salts leaching out of the concrete. Nothing to worry about. You can just, sometimes a regular hose will take it off. Sometimes you need to power wash. But that's nothing to worry about. So what's my problem with this? Well, in this particular application where they were trying to save money, they didn't put a border, right? So I know enough about how real stone is set to know that that's wrong. That just like bothers me like fingernails on chalk. But the other thing I really run into with stamped concrete is, well, it's kind of twofold. One is the warranty issues are difficult. So with pavers, with stone, especially on road base, my favorite, if things do wiggle a little bit, easy to come back and fix it. If a little crack gets in this, difficult to fix and difficult to determine if it's really a warranty issue or if it's sort of normal wear and tear. Not my favorite for that reason. And then have you guys ever seen 10-year-old stamped concrete? Not so nice. Doesn't tend to hold up really well in my opinion. So some of those paver and stone pictures I'm showing you are around 10 years old. I don't know if I'd be back to photograph that 10 years from now. So also, it is not permeable. So all that water is running off, getting in the urban drainage system, causing downstream flooding, not soaking into our ground, which we desperately need in Colorado. So that's the other thing I don't really like about it. But we designed this, we put this in. If you asked me what I put in stamped concrete, I'd tell you all the reasons I didn't want to. But it's not so bad that I wouldn't install it. Now this slide is super hard to see, so I think I'm going to skip over it. But if you look down around the fire pit of this slide, this is a new technique with concrete, and this is super inexpensive, and I am liking it. This is stained concrete. So what this is basically a simple pour, a brush finish, which is what we typically use on concrete, like in sidewalks in Colorado. So it's not slippery when wet, which, by the way, that's another thing I don't like about stamped concrete. It's slippery when wet. Have you ever been like around a pool deck with stamped concrete? That makes me nervous. I carry professional practice liability insurance. So this has a brush finish, so it's safe, and then it's just stained. Like you could stain your fence or anything else you want to stain. So if you have old concrete and you want to make it look different, you can buy concrete stain and make it be a different color. Have you all eaten like at Chipotle or Einstein Brothers Bagels and looked at those floors? That's stained concrete also. It's shiny. It's for inside use. But outside, we can also stain concrete, and it's pretty cool. So here is an example of a lighter color. This is a new technology. We've been doing it for like 3 years. We kind of know how concrete's going to hold up. We like to put wire mesh in our concrete the old-fashioned way, so there's wire in the pour. But how that color's going to hold up, I don't really know the answer to that. So I'm wondering if I put some in the shade and some in the sun, is it going to fade differentially? Probably, that's my guess. I don't believe in really any kind of warranties of anything lasting forever in the landscape. I mean, come on, it's outside. So that tree also, the tree up by the door, that's one of my favorite trees as well. Those are linden trees. And those have been planted around Colorado forever. They're not super xeric. I think they're one of the best trees. If you are going to put a tree in turf, they really can tolerate the water. Like some of the xeric trees that you are maybe familiar with, bur oaks, Kentucky coffee tree, which I'll show you later on. Those trees, if you put them close to turf, they may not really thrive. They don't want as much water as turf. But a linden tree is a good turf tree. One place a linden tree shouldn't go is by your driveway or by the street. Do you know why? They have a really sticky sap. And so you will be at the car wash a lot. And you know, like your windshield wipers will like stick to your windshield, it'll be gross. But that sticky sap is from the flowers, which smell awesome. I wish I had a linden tree. Oh, so here's something fun we did with concrete. This is a project in Northwest Denver for one of these new styled, really contemporary houses. So we decided to make a really funky, really contemporary landscape. So we built this pergola, which is made of steel and wood. And then we did a concrete walkway from the house to the garage. This picture is taken from above. And then did a border of imported Pennsylvania bluestone around the edge of the circular patio. So this is one that I think is this is brand new. This went in last spring. I think it's gonna develop really well. It's got trumpet vine going up that post of the pergola. Trumpet vine's really invasive. I have worked on a number of houses where I've had to bring in a contractor to fix the soffit because it grows up the house and in the soffit and into the attic. But here on a steel pergola, I'm good with it. And then this corner is a Zen garden, but instead of sand, we use different varieties of heuchera to create the waves of the ocean. So we'll see how that develops. And then those plants on the side, those are dwarf conifer. I believe they're Norway spruces. And that's a big trend right now, specialty conifers. Expensive, sometimes not reliable. When you got 4 of them in a row, you're praying. You don't want one to die 4 years later. But we're designers, so we do stuff like that. This is the front yard of this house. And so you can see we use the same border on their front patio, the idea of using the concrete and then the stone border. That Pennsylvania bluestone, we only used a little bit of it because is that sustainable? Totally not, right? It takes a lot of fossil fuel to drive stone from Pennsylvania to Denver. So when you're looking at sustainability, you really look at those sort of big picture issues. Now these people are not planning on launching bombs. What are those circle things for? That's going to be an edible front yard. So those are vegetable planters because they have that little tiny backyard, and so the front yard is going to be used for vegetable gardening. They fenced it in to kind of, I guess they want to keep their zucchini. They don't want to share it with everybody in their neighborhood. So that was a fun project, and I think that'll develop really well. We don't do a whole ton of decks at Ivy Street Design, not because I love pavers so much, but we do them occasionally. You can make decks out of 3 different products, basically old-fashioned redwood, the recycled lumber, manufactured lumber, or the sustainable hardwoods. So here's a deck. This one is made, the brand name you guys are probably familiar with recycled lumber products is not recycled, manufactured lumber products. Some of them are recycled now, supposedly, is Trex, right? You guys have all heard of that. So the underside of a manufactured lumber deck is still the treated pine and fir. That's the structure of it. And the structure needs to be a little bit beefier when you use the manufactured lumber because the weight is a little bit more than redwood or cedar. But basically the same. And these products, there's a big deck superstore in Denver, in Commerce City. Tons more manufacturers. When I first started using this product, a lot of times the railings and some of the details had to be made of cedar and redwood, so it sort of looked weird because they didn't match up. But now you can almost do the whole thing. And so here's one. We saw this slide before, right? This is the one with the random flagstone with the weeds in it. And here you can see this deck is a recycled lumber deck. It kind of spans a grade that goes way, way down. So decking is a really useful technique when you've got a slope and you want to stay flat coming out of the house. An interesting comment on this particular project is this is the main dining area for this family in Stapleton. One of the things we struggle with decks is this underside, right? That's pretty ugly. Maybe that's why I like pavers a lot. So what we did here was where these are the tree on the side is a sunburst honey locust, and then there's a row of shrubs. The locusts have started to get big and do their job and shade the deck. But underneath there's a row of shrubs, and we put Manhattan euonymus. Are you guys familiar with that plant? One of the few broadleaf evergreens that really thrives in Colorado. So a broadleaf evergreen is a plant that has leaves that stay green all winter. So when you're in a more mild climate like the Pacific Northwest or the South, you have rhododendrons, camellias, all those plants, magnolias, are broadleaf evergreens. They have leaves in the wintertime. but hardly any of those can stand up to our harsh Colorado winters, right? Those desiccating winds. It doesn't snow for 4 weeks in January. Hardly any plants will do that. Well, the euonymus family, Manhattan euonymus, Euonymus coloratus, there's a whole bunch of them, are broadleaf evergreens that in a relatively protected location will do well in Colorado. What I didn't know was this Manhattan euonymus, this particular variety, when it flowers, and the flowers are inconspicuous, another horticulture word you'll find when you read nursery catalogs trying to pick out plants, and inconspicuous is exactly what it means. Means what it says. The flowers are not really worth looking at, unless you're a fly. The flowers on this plant attract flies like crazy. And I didn't know this. So this client called me up and she's like, you know, our patio is disgusting. We can't stand sitting out there because every time we're eating, there's like all these flies everywhere. So we had to pull those out. I love Manhattan euonymus, but I've learned since then, never plant it by a patio. This is tropical hardwoods. This is a really super cool project we're working on in central Denver. It's very contemporary, and I don't have done slides because it's not done, but it's got all this rough finished concrete. It's going to have a stainless steel water feature, cool fireplace, and they're using tropical hardwood here to make these decks. And you can see a little bit on the stairs. We've got the steel cable going in as railing. That was wildly expensive. But you don't get that many clients who just say, okay, whatever, this is what I want. So it's nice to get to do that sometimes. And here you can see the different levels with the concrete. We'll be finishing this up this summer, and it should be cool. Look for it in Colorado Homes and Lifestyles, which one of our projects is in March issue of Colorado Homes and Lifestyles. So check us out. So here we are. This is a much more modest set of steps, but these are tropical hardwood too, and these have been in for a good 10 years, and they have really held up. I'm friends with these people. I go eat at their house. So I know those stairs look good. So tropical hardwoods are a little bit expensive. I wonder about their sustainability. Like if you're shipping that from South America, is that really, shipping costs are a huge part of the whole sustainability equation. So I wonder about that. But then maybe you're like employing people in South America who otherwise would be growing opium. I mean, how do you balance all that stuff? I guess they grow opium in Afghanistan mostly. Try to do the right thing, right? You try to educate your clients to do the right thing, but you don't even know what the right thing is. But you know, sort of. Retaining walls. So this is the other big piece of landscape that your measuring is really going to inform. I'm sorry, I have a cramp. What we do when we're designing walls is we use our drawings to help us locate walls and to help us determine how tall they need to be. Again, you've got HOA requirements, zoning code, and building code that may influence what you do. In almost every municipality, any retaining wall over 3 feet tall needs an engineer's stamp. So I won't go into this in detail. This is what we're doing at Front Range Community College right now, is we're learning to design retaining walls, and I had people all afternoon staring at me blankly, but I know they're gonna get there and be great at designing retaining walls. But we use a transit. In your handout that you got from the city of Fort Collins, you guys are supposed to use a builder's level, easier way to do it, to determine what the change in grade is. And then we plot it on a section view, which is a profile, which helps us determine that in this case, that wall, the top of wall is -7, the bottom of wall is -29, so that's a 22-inch high wall. And we plot over a course of a bunch of different areas in our walls, and we get really accurately designed walls. So here's an old drawing, over 10 years, because we've been drawing on CAD for a long time. But these are some section views on the top of these walls, and then this is the plan view of how these walls are gonna lay out. And here's a slide of what they look like. There's maybe a better slide in the wintertime. So these interlocking circles of Colorado buff stone are determined by that section drawing to build them accurately. So once I figured out how to build these interlocking loops of walls, I decided I need to do it a couple different times. So here's another project with those interlocking walls again. Again, this is this is a Colorado rose. This is the least expensive stone you can buy because it's locally available and widely available. So when we think about like things that have been built historically in Colorado, the Broadmoor, I hate to say this up here in Fort Collins, but the CU campus are built in Colorado Rose Flagstone. And so really historically, because they weren't shipping things from far away, the trend was to build sustainably. And there's another view of those interlocking walls on the project we just saw. So what we just saw are gravity walls. That means that they are held up basically by gravity. There's no concrete involved in those walls. So the stone itself is structural. And this is, again, no concrete, more sustainable. No concrete, easier to do. Now, probably you don't want to go building interlocking loop walls for your first project of wall building. Here is an ugly slope, and here is the wall that was built. Now this is a concrete block wall, and this does have interlocking loops. I did go through this phase when I was obsessed with interlocking loops. By building in concrete block, it's a gravity wall, it's completely engineered. So engineers at the places that produce these products determine exact standards for how to make this wall fit together. It's like Legos, and how high it can go and what needs to go behind it. So this is a great product for me to use because when I write specifications, I just say, install according to manufacturer's specifications. These blocks here probably weigh, this is a block product that is variable sized. I think this is a pavestone product, variable sized and tumbled. And these blocks probably weigh between 70 and 20 pounds a piece for the little ones. So again, a little bit of a challenge, like if you're not pretty physically fit, but this wall goes up pretty high, so we needed to get a beefy product in there. But there's some other more homeowner grade products if you're looking at doing a lower wall that is really pretty easy to do and probably going to be a successful project for you because it fits together like Legos. You don't need to chisel, you don't need to chip, you don't need to have practiced for 10 years to get it right, basically. There's a lot of color ranges. This is interesting. This was designed, that slope is south facing. It's a nasty slope. And you can see how successful grass is there, right? And this homeowner, he loves to garden, and he wanted a Xeriscape garden in there. And he lives close to me, so I go by this all the time. So we put in ice plant. You guys are familiar with ice plant, right? That's at the bottom of the slope there. And that has been a little bit troublesome. One of the challenging things with planting a plant by the sidewalk. So a lot of times we make these retaining walls, and then we have this little area by the sidewalk. We don't want to put turf there, right? That'd be stupid. So we want to plant some kind of ground cover down there. And I have found on this particular site, the ice plant has done pretty well because it's south facing, so the snow melts off it quickly. But if people are shoveling this walkway and the snow gets piled up on the ice plant, it is ice plant slime by the end of the winter, right? It just doesn't hold up with snow on it. But here on the south facing side, it's all good. Then I planted in that middle terrace, this is one of my favorite plants. This is Texas red yucca. So it's not actually a yucca, it's a Hesperaloe, that's the name of it. Super cool plant, very structural, almost looks like an aloe. Cool red flowers. And then we have some salvia on top. But what John has done, that's the homeowner who lives there, is he loves plants. And so every year he plants tons of annuals. And so what does he do? I mean, those are all like pansies in there. He bumps up his water use to accommodate all the annuals. And it's interesting to see how those xeric plants have done in combination with the annuals. So he's got like a knockout rose or one of the shrub roses, which I love, and that is really liking the water. But those Texas red yuccas, they don't look that good. This is the old-fashioned way of building walls, timbers, right? We all remember that from the 70s. And this has held up well. The plant on here is another euonymus, but nobody's eating close to this. Euonymus is, again, that broad leaf will hold on better. This is north facing with more protection. So that's what it's going to look like during the winter. Not a great picture, but Pretty good. And here we go with a dry stack stone in a more informal setting. So the ones I showed you, the loopy ones, were super formal, but you can certainly use a more rustic rock to get a really nice retaining wall. My caution is the same as it was with those random stones. Do you think this comes with a pattern of how to fit them together? Nope. I always tell my Front Range students that once they've been in class for a whole year learning to be landscape designers, driving around is never the same. In fact, when my kids were growing up, and they grew up with me, and I've been a landscape architect forever, when we would drive around, we would play Find the Construction Error. And so now you can do that. Like, oh my gosh, that guy built such a crappy wall. Can you believe it? So this is a pretty nice wall, but it's very loose. Behind it is gravel, looser gravel than what you would see what you see compacted under a paver, but helps to drain water through there. Because it's gravity and free drainingness that makes this wall be structurally sound. This wall is cool because the plants have started to grow through it. And again, you have one of my favorite plants, another euonymus at the base of the wall. That is I think that's a japonicus, but it's a white margined broadleaf euonymus. Then the blue flowered plant, one of my super favorites, I use it all the time. You know, there's a joke that landscape architects only use like 10 plants, which isn't true, we use 20. This is, and I love the name of this in scientific, it's Ceratostigma plumbaginoides. That makes me sound like really horticulturally knowledgeable, right? And I am, pretty much. But this is a great plant. Those blue blooms start in about August and really go through September. It will take it's a nice transitional plant. So as designers, we always look for what is the range that plant is going to cover, from sun to shade, from dry to wet. And this plant, leadwort is the common name, is a really good transitional plant. Seems to cover a broad range of conditions. More water, it can almost be aggressive. Turns a nice red in the fall. This time of year is the only time of this year when I think this plant is really underperforming because it doesn't emerge till really late. So it has sort of all these nasty brown shoots sticking up when like you're kind of ready for something to start happening. My solution on that was I interplanted that with this other sort of fuzzy green plant, that's creeping phlox. So that's an awesome plant early in the spring. You guys all know what that is, right? And in the fall, it sometimes starts to kind of, fall, late summer, it kind of starts to look like a dirty bath mat. And so with the leadwort taking over the show, you have a combination planting that's really working in this site. So this is a story of a project. So this is in Stapleton. Are you guys familiar with Stapleton in Denver? So it used to be the airport, and then it was redeveloped as a community, and it was redeveloped under the concept of new urbanism, which is a really important planning concept that said that suburbs with big yards didn't foster community spirit and used up too much water, were environmentally unsustainable. So Stapleton was built to feel like an older neighborhood with houses closer together, but they decided to take it one step further and get, in all the older neighborhoods, at least in Denver, you have grass in your front yard. Well, in Stapleton, they were going to be like way greener than that. They put in no grass, all shrubs and grasses. But it's not really working for a lot of people. And I am really wondering if it is sustainable because do you know how big those junipers are going to get? And they're like 24 inches apart from each other. So the longevity of this landscape, I could tell it wasn't going to last a long time, and my client had it early on. So here we are, we got rid of everything, and we decided to put in some retaining walls. So here you can see the ground being excavated, being pushed way back, over excavation for walls. And here you can see, the designer must have come out on site and she spray painted where the face of the wall was going to go. You see that on the top end of the slide? Kind of coming down from the kneeling down laborer. And here we are, we put in these nice walls. And so this made it much more friendly to planting in. And here it is. Yeah, so not anything really super fancy. That is a gravity wall. And then those plants, I think that's like a basic spring snow crab. You know, those are the white flowering crabs that don't make any crab apples, because lots of people have bad feelings towards crab apples. And then Santolina, I believe. I think that's Santolina, or it could be Moonshinero, I can't tell. And then a dianthus in the front. And then in front of this wall is Candy Tuft, Iberis. And that is my favorite next to the wall plant. I think I have some better slides of it coming up, so I'll talk about it later. So this is not so nice either. This is an older home, probably built in the 50s, on a fairly large lot. And this was all junipers when I first met these people like 10 years ago. They got rid of their junipers, and then they were like, wow, this is even worse. So I wish I had some construction shots of this, but I don't. Here's what it looks like afterwards. We retained this. Oh, I should have put the slides in the opposite order. We put in large boulders to retain this. So we came in here with a tractor, and we used, their budget was not enormous. They had a big lawn, 2 kids going to college. So they were concerned about budget, but they liked to garden. So the boulders we used are river boulders. They're not moss rock. They're much less expensive than moss rock. So the order of pricing for boulders basically goes with blasted granite as the cheapest. And actually that Stapleton project I showed you has some blasted granite in it. Then these river boulders, and then the more fancy moss rock. And sometimes, I think here I did this too, I combined some moss rock with the river boulders so they could get some of that really kind of fancy moss rock, and then sort of had the river boulders be like the worker bees. These boulders are placed with a tractor. So unless you want to rent a tractor, you're probably not going to do this yourself. But you could. You need a couple guys to dig out for the boulders, somebody to be the tractor driver, and then you could do it. So on a skid steer, you can move a boulder that's up to about 2,000 pounds, about a ton, a little over a ton. So we just did a bunch of boulders yesterday. It's fun. And here you can see some of the details of that as the plants have matured. Okay, so now we're back to using concrete. Now, are these walls bad? You know, I talk about how they're not sustainable. Well, my work tends to be a lot in historic neighborhoods of Denver, older neighborhoods. And so there, if you're a historic preservationist, this is the best way to go, right? It looks old. When my daughter was in 8th grade, this is embarrassing to admit, but I read To Kill a Mockingbird for the first time when she read it. And I was like, wow, this house looks like Boo Radley's house. So here's the plan we draw. This was at the end of the obsession with elliptical walls. And here we were accommodating some of those plants over here. There were some pretty cool trees in here. There's a gigantic old honey locust. I think there's a hackberry. So there were trees we decided we needed to preserve on this site, even though these junipers were going to go. So in our plan view here, the trees with the dark colored in circles, those are the existing trees, which when you're working around existing trees, you really need to keep the grade, the level, the same. You can't bring in dirt and cover up the feeder roots. You can bring in a little bit of dirt, but you can't cover them up a whole lot, or you deprive the tree of oxygen and cause it a slow death, which I think builders and contractors do a lot, and probably even landscape architects, because by the time the tree dies, everybody forgets why it died. On the other hand, in Denver, this is in Denver, you totally cannot take out street trees. You need a permit to do it. And I can tell you that the Denver City Forester, no matter how ugly that tree is, they don't want you to get rid of it. And these are good trees. Here's a construction detail that shows how we're going to build walls on that site. So this is a concrete wall that is veneered with brick, and I'll show you some construction pictures. To make that wall work, brick doesn't hold things up. You need this concrete, and the concrete to hold things up needs to go below grade. And that concrete really, that drawing doesn't show it should have rebar in it, and it might even want to have a spread footer, like a T at the bottom. So this is how the concrete works. So there's a footer that goes below grade, and then there's a concrete ledge that the brick, which is sheerly decorative, the brick has no function other than looking good, which, you know, when you're a designer, you're okay with that. The brick is basically a veneer. And here we go when it was done. And there it is a couple falls later. So again, you can see there's a couple signature elements like those radius stairs. And then we did another set of radius stairs leading up into the house. And that plant at the bottom of the wall is my favorite that I sort of left the last presentation on, Candy Tuft, because it's evergreen there at the bottom of the wall. Here's another one. This is Park Hill. This is my neighborhood in Denver, so an old neighborhood in Denver. I don't live in a house like that, though, or the one I just showed you. I'm a landscape architect, after all. So this is before on that one. And so this little stupid grass hill, this is so typical of Denver. And here's what we did. So the people wanted to look like it had been there forever. And so we got rid of those stupid old spruce trees. They were pretty nasty. I'm not a tree hugger. I was like, yeah, those gotta go. Then there's kind of like this crappy little entrance to kind of a grandiose house. And so we did a new entrance, the walls, to make it look historic. And that's kind of been some of our signature work. And this is with brick. So these are bricks, and we sometimes match old bricks. We went to Mendoza Used Brickyard in Denver to get these used bricks to match the house. That's one of the weirdest places ever. I hope no one's like from that family here. I guess I shouldn't have said that. But you can find a lot of weird old stuff. We go shopping for bricks there. This is a wall that we built in, this house is in Northwest Denver. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And so we built this wall probably like 15 years ago. So that is a veneer wall with bush hammered, I think that's the correct word, Colorado rose stone, a cap that's like 5 inches thick to all look exactly historic. Fortunately, we didn't need to pull permits on this. None of this work required a permit. None of it was over 3 feet tall. And historic preservation only requires a permit when they're altering the structure of the house. Because if we had to go through historic preservation on this, wow, that would have been a hassle. It's a huge hassle. But this wall cost like $80,000 like 10 years ago. Super expensive. And there you can see how beautifully detailed it is. This is a project, this is a trend that's happened in Denver. It's slowed down a little bit. I'm sure it's happening up here in Fort Collins as a scraper phenomenon. So they take a neighborhood with kind of modest houses, scrape them off, and put in big new houses. And this is one of the ones that we've worked on. And this was on a really steep slope. And so we had to put in, the builder insisted, I started working on this project while the house was in construction, which is a great time, or even before it went into construction. So this was a client I've known probably, in fact, my daughter is 20, and I first worked for this lady when I was pregnant with her. So I've like known her forever through several houses. And so she brought me in during the builder phase where this yard was going to be heavily retained, and the builder wanted all poured in place concrete. So we designed where these walls went, and then the veneer on them is a stone veneer. So it's a little bit hard to see in the slide, but that's a very thin stone. It's applied like brick to the wall to make it look like a natural stone wall. But these walls were super structural, so a natural stone wall wouldn't have been appropriate. But most of the time we build our stone walls as gravity walls, right? Because it's less expensive and it's more sustainable. But here we had to use a veneer product. And here it is planted up. This lady loves to garden. And so it's really interesting, kind of as you get towards the back end of the slide, that location's really sunny. And as you get to the foreground, this white powder puff plant here, that is Annabelle hydrangea, likes a little bit more shade. One of my favorite plants for semi-shade is these Annabelle hydrangeas. And now they're introducing a lot of new hydrangeas. I've noticed in Stapleton and all that bad planting, I think they like choose random plants, or they hire people who graduated from school like last week to be the landscape planting designers in Stapleton. But one of the random plants that they've installed and has done really well is hydrangea Pinky Winky. Sounds really cheesy, but it's a really cool hydrangea with kind of cone-shaped pink blossoms. I'm speccing it like crazy now because it survived in Stapleton. The other plant with the more palmate foliage that's behind the hydrangea is another favorite of mine. That is Japanese anemones. fall bloomer with pink flowers. I don't have any pictures of it in bloom. And then behind that, the yellow fuzzy one is another great underused plant, way more xeric than I really think it gets credit for. And also good transitionally sun to shade is lady's mantle, Alchemilia mollis. There is a design error in this slide. Both the lady's mantle and the Japanese anemone, which will thrive in the exact same horticultural conditions, are planted next to each other. And what's the design error? They're going to bloom at different times, so they're not making a composition. That's not great. But I think the design error, and I designed this, is that they both have palmate foliage. So there's not the foliage contrast. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about plants kind of more specifically. Then as you get towards the back of that slide, as it starts to get really sunny, those purple spiky ones, a great xeric plant. I had someone ask me some questions about planting on acreage where you start to get real dry. That plant up there is Liatris gayfeather. That is a native plant to the prairie. So when I've worked out in Parker or in other native areas, I have seen this growing naturally. And it's way shorter, like 6 to 8 inches tall when it grows naturally. And here it's irrigated. And I do have to say this client likes to irrigate generously. It gets taller. So it'll thrive with that more water. And then behind that is the moonbeam coreopsis. Not a super xeric plant. But if you want something that blooms all summer and you're like scared of bright yellow, you like to keep your yellows a little bit more buttery, that plant is a really, really good worker. Although personally it always dies in my garden, but it like does great for my clients. So the other veneer we can apply to walls is stucco. So probably the least expensive of our veneers. So because it's just easier to put on, I always worry about how it's going to hold up in the landscape. And I don't like to use it anywhere people are going to be walking close by, kicking it. I think it'll get messy looking. Notice on these walls, do you see how the top, the coping, overhangs a little bit? I think that's an important design detail because that allows the water to drip off, especially on stucco, so that the water doesn't run down the face of that stucco and make stains. So in that super modern project that I showed you, the one with the hardwood deck and the exposed concrete walls, there's also some stucco walls on that. And the homeowner was insistent that she didn't want any copings. And I'm like, you're going to have drips going down your wall in 3 years. She's like, I don't care. I'm like, okay, whatever. So this is an uncoped wall, and that worries me. Okay, well this is what really had my students glazed over at school today. It was risers and treads, which means steps. There's a lot of rules around this. Like, design's supposed to be creative, right? I think there's rules. I know there's rules. So the risers, the up and down part, between 5 and 7 inches high. Inside, they need to be 6 inches high, and you have inspections on that inside. But in the landscape, we don't have a lot of inspections, but we do have liability. So we want to keep things safe. All the risers in a given set of stairs should be the same. That means if you start with 5, they're all going to be 5. You don't have 5, then 6, then 7. Not okay. 2 times riser plus tread equals 26. So the riser, okay, I'm not very good at math, doing it in my head, but if the risers are 6 inches, then the tread is ideally 13. Wait, no, 14. See, I told you I was bad at math. That is an ideal riser-tread ratio. But when you go to lay out stairs in a variety of situations, that might not happen because you got to fit the stairs in some little tight area, so you're just going to do the best you can. But using these section drawings is kind of how we figure that out. More rules. Tread should be a minimum of 12 inches deep. That's how big treads are inside. And easily up to 14. Sometimes I take them to 16. Over 16 inches, I'm short. So over 16 inches, I'm like, I can't really walk. And I think if I was taller, maybe 18 would be okay, but over 18 is weird for anybody, right? Because you can't decide if it's 1 step or 2 steps. So I think 16 is kind of the most you would go. So every tread is the same, but you can use landings to kind of accommodate different degrees of slope. Now, if you live like up in the foothills or out on acreage, and you're doing some really natural stone stairs, you can stretch these rules a little bit. But in general, we want to stay pretty tight to these rules, because if you have a party at your house and it gets dark and somebody had a couple too many and they trip, not so good. Stairs should either float or be enclosed by retaining walls or wing walls. So that means on the side of the steps there needs to be some kind of wall, or they need to be exactly floating with the land. So this one, another one I didn't design. Here's what we did put in. Same house. So you can see that the stairs up towards the house where we built this Colorado Rose retaining wall with boulders built into it, those stairs, as you come into the house, they're enclosed by wing walls, the walls that wrap around them. Then through the turf, we designed it carefully so the stairs float with the natural grade of that turf. And again, we use that section and elevation drawing technique to be able to determine how that works. So we consider as landscape architects that this is the core of our work, is this sculpting the land. And I think it's a lot of fun to do this. And one thing, if you're looking at some of this work and you are do-it-yourselfers, it may be you want to get 60% there and then ask a landscape architect or a landscape designer who's familiar with working with grading and drainage to come look at your work, to check it for you, to help you out, to make sure it really is working out well for you. And here are some steps. This was like the beginning of the radius phase, right? Those were those walls I showed you in the beginning. And those steps are a stone veneer. So stone is mortared to concrete on that one. All right, a little bit more on plants before we finish up, because that's what everybody loves best, right? We all start this because we like plants. And then all of a sudden, we're like cutting sections and designing retaining walls. For all that we all like plants, one of my key things is no matter how much we like the plants in a landscape have a job to do. And that's the most important thing. So is it supposed to be shading a patio? Is it supposed to be creating privacy? Is it a plant that just gets to play, that gets to be in a beautiful border? But most plants have jobs to do, and that's the most important thing to think about in planting design. So we do not put plants into our designs just because, well, I love spireas, so I'm going to put one spirea here. And then I also love birding bush, which I actually hate. Don't plant that plant. Over here, so I want one of those. And then junipers are evergreen, and I like junipers. And by the way, I do like junipers because they do their job, right? They cover up the ground, they're relatively xeric, and they're evergreen. We talked a bunch about broadleaf evergreens, but there's not a lot of broadleaf evergreens in Colorado, and we need evergreen plants. Like the bulbs aren't really quite doing their thing yet, so the evergreens are doing their jobs. So that's the most important thing when you're planning a whole entire site. What plant, how am I going to make this a space, and what plant is going to help me do that job? But the plant can't do its job unless it's growing in the correct conditions. So I had a person here ask me about their acreage, which I think is out in the prairie, and she wanted to define some spaces. And I thought, well, maybe Cercocarpus ledifolius, mountain mahogany, would do the job of defining her spaces, and it would grow out on the prairie, which is dusty and dry and probably not the place to grow Manhattan euonymus, even if you really like flies. So the other thing that I think is important about, a couple other things I think that are important about plants, because they're doing their jobs, right? We're not planting them because they have beautiful pink flowers. We're not even allowed to think about flowers in planting design class, which is super disappointing to most people, is the form of the plant. What shape is it? Because the shape will help to determine if it can do its job or not. And then we also like to think about texture, because texture will also help to influence its role in its job, and it will also define how it fits in with its neighbors. Remember the slide I showed you where I said there was a design error because there were those Japanese anemones and the lady's mantle right next to each other? they had the same texture and they kind of have the same form, basal rosette. So you don't get any definition or contrast in there. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Finally, time. Not only do plants have jobs to do, but they have neighbors. And in an ideal landscape, all the plants that are neighbors are working together to do the job of being beautiful. And that means that there's interest in form and texture, and that the way they're balanced in time. So remember, we looked at salvia and moonbeam coreopsis, or liatris and moonbeam coreopsis together. They were working together to make a combination of plants. So let's keep going, we'll see what that is. These oak leaf mounted ashes, this Sorbus hybrida, is doing the job of creating privacy. Right? There's an alley back there. That's the job of those plants. In this slide, the cotoneasters are doing a job of covering up the ground under a spruce tree. Okay, that is a hard job to do. I can think of like 3 plants who can do that job without dying, and not dying is an important thing to, for a plant. So those plants are in there because otherwise it'd be bare ground. They're doing their job. So what are some of the forms we define plants with? Cones, like blue spruce trees, right? Those are cones. Or pear trees, one of the 10 plants landscape architects like. Lollipops, what's a lollipop? Like a crab tree, right? Kind of like a lollipop. But in a smaller plant, an allium or phlox is a little lollipop. Columns, those upright junipers, columnar buckthorn, they're just straight up and down. Fans, Janella maples, serviceberries, cubes, boxwood. Mounds, spirea. And sprawlers, oh, my favorite, junipers doing their job. I have to say I'm not really that in favor of like big lumpy junipers. I'm a sprawling juniper kind of girl. Grassy, that would mean your ornamental grasses, but also some of your perennials like irises and daylilies. Another, in my opinion, design error is daylilies and irises next to each other. Right? Like, did you make a mistake when you were at the nursery and buy 2 things that were sort of different? Glossy. So some of those broadleaf evergreens are pretty glossy. Also, rose foliage. Think about rose foliage. That's a glossy texture. Coarse, on the other hand, would be, are you guys familiar with catalpa trees? Kind of a rough texture there. Lacy, fernleaf buckthorn. I think some of the serviceberry, prickly, thorns. That's pretty easy. Fuzzy, so like a lamb's ear. Think of how dominant the texture is in a lamb's ear. It really dominates your feeling of that plant. Transparent, they're just light. So let's see some examples. Oh, we're not to examples yet. We're still on words. Examples are a lot more fun than words. So when we talk about planting design, when I teach planting design at school, and students do their own designs, and they put them up on the room, and everybody looks at them. It's a traditional way that we teach design. So it's a critique method, presenting critique. The students are not allowed to say, oh, I thought that would look good. They have to use design vocabulary words. Like the scale of this Janella maple was appropriate to this courtyard garden and contrasted the lacy texture of the sweet woodruff I planted underneath. And I repeated those Janella maples along the periphery of the property, creating some rhythm. It's balanced by the larger blah, blah, blah. And the organizational feature is, and dominant in this whole, the top of the hierarchy is this big blue spruce that was existing. So that's how we talk about planting design. So this is probably one of the coolest, most xeric landscapes I've ever designed. This, by the way, this turf is buffalo grass. So we haven't really talked about turf before very much in this presentation. I am not opposed to bluegrass. Sometimes it's just what you need to do. It is the most durable grass. So if you have kids or dogs, just put some grass in for your kids and your dogs. It's going to hold up better than anything else. The turf type tall fescues, which is probably the closest competition, isn't as soft, and if it's drought stressed, if we were to hit another big drought where water would be limited, it's a bunch grass. It'll bunch up, trying to protect its little turf, literally, I guess. It's kind of a stupid pun. And once it gets more water, it will never unbunch. So bluegrass is a sod-forming grass. That's what makes that really super nice carpet. And so is buffalo grass. And buffalo grass is what was here before Anglo people basically were here, when it was like buffaloes. It's beautiful. I really like the way it looks. It's a nice sagey green, which is really, in my opinion, more appropriate to the bright light of Colorado. So why don't more people have buffalo grass? Like, I don't have it in my house. Well, it's not shade tolerant, and I have a giganto elm tree in front of my house, so that's the end of that. But there's also a few other constraints with buffalo grass. Number one is it's quite expensive to get it as sod, so typically we need to install it as seed. And what happens when you plant a bunch of seeds?
Birds eat them.
I haven't had too much problem with birds eating them. What grows in between all those little seeds? What's like what are gazillions of in the soil? Weed seeds. And so to establish a clean stand of buffalo grass typically requires hand weeding to get the weeds out. And so you need a patient client or someone who has a big maintenance budget to make it work, or a lot of Roundup, which is maybe not so good. The other disadvantage of buffalo grass, and I have to say I love buffalo grass, I just don't think it can really fit everywhere, is it's prickly. The dog doesn't like it. And if the dog gets over it and still runs on it, and the kids get over it and they run on it, it doesn't hold up very well. Well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? I mean, after all, it was here and buffalo were on it. Well, buffalo have a different standard of aesthetics than we do looking out our kitchen window every day. So if the buffalo made a muddy mess of one particular patch of buffalo grass, they could move on to somewhere else. But buffalo grass doesn't stand up to the heavy wear patterns of urban-suburban living. That doesn't mean that if you live on acreage, you shouldn't think about putting buffalo grass in. Or if you have a front yard, like these people, this is in their front yard in a kind of very developed neighborhood in Denver. And they're like, well, our front yard grass is stupid. We never go on it. So let's put in buffalo grass. And in their backyard, they have bluegrass, and they have kids, and that's where the kids play. The kids wouldn't play on that area. So here we have some really pretty xeric planting design. Along with the buffalo grass, we have Anithera macrocarpa, that's a Missouri primrose with lavender. And so these are on, if you guys are familiar with the color wheel, they are on opposite ends of the color spectrum, yellow and purple, plus these two shades, I get these words mixed up, hues and shades, have equal amounts of white in them. So that makes the buttery yellow and the lavender color, not a highly saturated purple. And then across the buffalo grass, the color of the Anithera is echoed, ooh, another nice design word, with the moonshine yarrow. So do you see how that works? But with a more upright form. This is more of a sprawler form. So nice combination. All the foliage tends to be kind of in that silvery color. With yarrow, I would definitely stick with moonshine. Don't use those other more invasive forms of yarrow, or you will have like a yarrow moonscape. Then elsewhere in this project, you can see some foliage from, I think these are daylilies, which are the least xeric in here. And then this is the plant that was the award-winning plant in the drought. When was our big drought? It was a long time ago, like 2002, 2003. This plant is Calero involucrata poppy mallow. And this plant is somewhat invasive with a lot of water, but with not much water, it thrives. That was the only plant really that looked good in the big drought. And it blooms all summer. It gets kind of nasty looking. You just go out there with the kitchen shears, cut it all back. 3 weeks later, it looks good again. Behind that, on the other side of the buffalo grass, is my favorite evergreen for people who swear they'll never look at another juniper and they live in full sun. This is hillside creeper pine. So it's the creeper form of Pinus sylvestris. And these need a little bit of water, but these are low-growing evergreens. They have a little bit more of a fuzzy feel. They are really thriving for us. This is a top performer. A little bit expensive, but you know, when someone tells you they don't want any evergreen, you're like, that's not true. You just don't say that out loud. So then behind that is the plant that I was recommending for the acreage out here, is a mountain mahogany, Cercocarpus ledifolius, native to the prairie. Very strong prickly texture. Not for everybody, but in this case it works well in this situation where they wanted to really push the limits of what's xeric. And then here's what we have out by the street there. We have a combination of pine leaf penstemon, which I've since decided I hated, but I think I might like it again. You know, plants kind of go in and out with me. Then the moonshine yarrow again, and then this orange blooming plant is not super xeric. It's probably died out there. But in a moderate water border, it's a fantastic plant. Milkweed, Acephalus tuberosa, butterfly weed is the name of it. It's just the most fantastic shade of orange, and I've been into orange lately. It's been my new design thing. And here's that same project in the fall, kind of looking back at the hillside creepers are kind of in the midground. That red colored plant in the foreground is Rus aromatica, low growth sumac. There's a new variety out, amber something or another, that's supposed to be even lower. Super xeric plant. This, I don't think I've ever replaced one of these. They never die. And great fall foliage late, almost to Thanksgiving. So again, for those of you who are living in tough growing conditions, that is a plant to try for sure. And then, those junipers are doing their job. What can I say? That tree there, which you can't see much of, there's two really cool trees in this project. There is a Kentucky coffee tree. That's the tree in the foreground, Gymnoclitus dioecious. This is a great, very spare, a great xeric tree, super xeric, disease resistant, drought resistant. It makes small pods, but not as annoying as catalpa pods. It has bipinnately compound foliage, so a light shade. So why isn't this plant more widely planted? Well, it's a very spare tree. And when you go to buy trees in a nursery, I'm sure you all have done this, this is not an attractive tree. This is the gawky teenager. It looks like, it has like 3 branches. And you tell the client, oh, this is a great tree, you should buy it. And they're over there looking at ash trees and linden trees. They're like, no, we don't want that tree. But definitely a tree to consider, because over time it really does super well. There in the background with the mid-fall color is a xeric tree that's sort of come into popular culture more readily than Kentucky coffee trees, although it's quite thorny. It's a Russian hawthorn, quite xeric. And there that is in the winter. So we can really see our design vocabulary at work, where form and texture is revealed. That's the Russian hawthorn there. Doesn't that look pretty with a little bit of snow of it? Because it has a really kind of lacy, prickly texture. And here's springtime, what we see now with some little bulbs coming up. Now that is really ugly, right, you guys? And we already saw the slide of the after. I didn't think I had this in here, but now look at that. That's that. So the neighbors over here, like you think this yard is ugly, the neighbors is like worse. So one of the jobs we needed to do was screen that yard, because inside the house, it's a 2-story house. They really did not enjoy seeing like their neighbors trashed out cars and boats. And so we have back in the background where the fence is, pear trees. So these are probably Chanticleer or Bradford pears, and they are just there doing their job. They are not a horticulturally exciting plant. Landscape architects get dissed on all the time for using pear trees, but we do because they really do their job. I think they're more problematic back east where they grow super fast. Here they don't grow so super fast. So they're a great tree for Colorado. They're really regular, so they're easy to sell to people because you go to the nursery and you buy them and they all look really regular. And we like to do sometimes plantings that are monochromatic, that are just basically all the same, and they're so reliable that we know we can make it work. So here's looking the opposite way in this same planting project. We have, I think I mentioned before, the prunella ground cover, the drier substitute for ajuga. Underneath the pear trees, the yellow in the front is goldenrod. And then the white, I think this is an aster, and I don't know what variety it is. You remember the big ugly spruces that we saw in that one slide? There's another big ugly spruce there, but these homeowners didn't want to take it down. So we planted like an insurance policy tree, because I know that spruce is going to die. Man, it's ugly too. So the tree behind the fireplace is a red oak. Beautiful trees, the trees of the Midwest. Fabulous fall color, although not always reliable in fall color. Needs a protected location. That's a tree for older neighborhoods. You're not going to be planting that tree in a brand new neighborhood where there's no shade, no protection, lots of wind. But in an older neighborhood, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous tree. Lots of really nice ones in Denver. This is a close-up on that same project. This is a combination of I think it's an elfin pink penstemon, a shrub rose that I don't remember what variety it is, and lavender. So it's a pastel-leaning combination. I find that very difficult to achieve in Colorado because our light is so bright. It tends to wash out the pastels. So I get clients who live in like this full bright sun environment. They're like, we want it to be pastel and look like England. I'm like, mwah. It's going to be tough. But here this is in this site, which is quite protected. It works pretty well. So on this site, the way it works is you have the living room, the fireplace, which is two-sided, separating the living room from the dining room. Then we have the dining table. Then we have beyond that a perennial border. And then beyond that, there's another seating area with a fountain, which I didn't bring pictures of because I'm trying to kind of mostly show you things that you're going to maybe do yourselves. So I'm not showing like the super fancy stuff in general. I showed some of it because I can't help it. But because I like it, that's what I do. But I also do all this planting stuff and some that aren't super fancy. So this is the perennial border, and this is part of that perennial border. And then this is a fall combination, talking about time. And so here we have the plant's jobs, basically in this perennial border, is like to look good, right? They don't really have any other job besides looking good, being eye candy. But we like them to really do it well. So here we have a nice fall combination of pampas grass with that foliage kind of moving down. This is not super xeric. But it's more xeric than if this whole yard was grass, right? Oh, yeah. So then we have autumn joy sedum. You guys are probably familiar with that plant. That's a pretty well-known plant. You can see that goldenrod is in the background. And then this is a cool underused plant. This is not the aster. This is a boltonia, which is like it's almost as tall as me in a year with a lot of rain. But aster-like blooms. And probably because I'm a short person, I like tall plants. I do not like squatty plants. I'm prejudiced against my own self. Here we have a yard in a very urban neighborhood in Denver that's very lushly planted. This client is a good gardener. He grows magnolias and rhododendrons in Denver. But he also had a neighbor on this side of him that built a high-up deck. So this is the same guy with the teak stairs. The teak stairs are kind of like where, not teak, but hardwood stairs, are where I'm standing. So he would feel like his neighbor. He liked to entertain a lot. He cooks on that grill. He's in the wine industry. He has great dinner parties. He would feel like his neighbor was looking at him, and he liked his neighbor, but he didn't always want to invite the neighbor to the dinner parties. So we built this trellis structure, which is, I think, a cool structure, but what makes it even cooler is the plants doing their jobs. And so the plants doing their jobs here is sweet autumn clematis, easy plant to grow. Xeric, and it's like grows and grows and grows. And then combined with that is a white combination. I think that's an iceberg rose. I don't remember which white rose it is, but a combination in white. And so if you only had this trellis thing, it wouldn't have that soft, gentle feel over the summer. So the plant's jobs are really just to soften that up and provide an additional layer of privacy. Here are some plants that are totally not xeric, but they are doing their job because this yard doesn't drain. In fact, I'm going back there hopefully in a week or so because her whole porch is settling. Also because she overwaters, but also because the builder graded this yard in a really super stupid way. So this corner is super soggy. So we have Monarda, it likes water, Delphinium, and the Clematis, I'm surprised is doing as well as it is, and a blue spruce will take quite a bit of water. Spruces like water. So they're looking cool, they're making a pastel combination, and they're dealing with the site because we don't always we tend to think Xeriscape, hot and dry. And that may be your condition in your yard, but I can tell you working in Denver, there's a lot of situations that are shady, that maybe are wetter because of the way it drains. So Xeriscape doesn't always mean prairie plants. This is a cool project that we worked on. It's also super urban, and that's a Kentucky coffee tree in the background there. That tree in City Park in Denver, just west of the Museum of Nature and Science, if you happen to go down to the Museum of Nature and Science, just on the hill below the museum there, is a big mature Kentucky coffee tree and also a big mature horse chestnut tree, which in the ugly spruce tree project, we planted a horse chestnut tree, but I think it was out of the slide. You couldn't really see it. Those are both super cool trees, and they're both huge, like 60 feet tall, and just amazing. That size of that tree is for our grandchildren, not so much for us. It's going to take a while. And here's that Zen garden with these heucheras, trying to do a brand new job for heucheras, be pretend sand. I think that's going to be cool. And here they are. So I think that might work. I'm really curious to go back there. We just planted it last year. And this first year, they didn't plant those planters with vegetables. They just put some grasses and sweet potato vine in there. And there's a this one. Yeah, see that tree? At the corner of the house is a tree lilac, Syringia reticulata. It's not the same as regular Syringia vulgaris, is like the purple lilacs that we're all familiar with. This is a white Japanese lilac. It's pretty widely planted around Denver. There's old ones on the 17th Avenue Parkway. These smell unbelievably strong, the reticulata varieties. And then at the very corner, you see that little peeping bit of foliage? That's the hackberry tree there. And then at the base of there is planted the candy tuft. That candy tuft, Iberis, will really withstand, because this is a north-facing wall, snow getting piled up on it, and it won't die. And then when it fills in, it'll be evergreen all winter. So a plant, it is one of those ones that, what can I say? I probably plant hundreds of them every year. And there it is. Isn't that pretty when it's in bloom? And then you can also plant, I think one of the cool things to do with candy tuft is you plant bulbs coming up through it, so you get layers of plants. Ground cover can do the job. Remember with bulbs, you're not allowed to take off the foliage or they don't come back. So ground covers can do the job of covering up that icky bulb foliage. So we typically plant ground covers and bulbs together. Here's a great shade combination. With texture really contrasting, the glossy texture of the euonymus. That's a variegated euonymus I showed you earlier on, kind of a nicer picture. And then one of my super favorite plants in the whole entire planet, yews. Yews are an evergreen that come to us from more temperate climates, but I have beautiful yews in front of my house. I live in Denver. It's east facing, but it's not super shady, kind of shady. And my yews are gorgeous, and I never, ever water them. They're established. So I think it is a pretty reliable plant, and you can see that really strong textural contrast. How do you know if your texture and form is contrasting? Take a picture, click that button on your computer that makes it turn to black and white, and you can see if you're leaning on color too much or if you made it work with form and texture. And so here's form and texture in the wintertime. This is the other side of the people. There's that sinful euonymus. But these are granite boulders, the least expensive boulders. And I like this slide because even in the winter, Fiona has a lot of form and texture going on here. Kind of naturalistic looking. It's not for the neatniks among us, but for those of us who like to garden, I think that still looks good. So what am I going to say in conclusion? How do I put it all together to create a fabulous, sustainable landscape that's great for outdoor living? Review the site thoughtfully. So for those of you who are working on this on your own, you have great instructions that the City of Fort Collins has provided you on how to measure your site, and do not skimp here. You know, when we do it professionally, we have done it a million times over, and we can go pretty fast because we know what's really exactly relevant. And that's one of the learning curves of becoming a landscape designer, is to be efficient. But to start out with, just really be careful, follow those instructions by the book, you'll be good. And also really think about what you want. How are you going to use that outdoor space? Do you really like to garden, or do you just kind of think you like to garden? You know, how much hardscape do you want? Clients are always concerned when they look at plants, oh, it's going to be way too much hardscape. And they try and be like, no, it's going to be fine. And I've never had someone after it was built say, oh, I wish I'd put in less hardscape. What I usually hear is, yeah, I should have listened to you because now I don't have any place for these lounge chairs. I'd be like, well, yeah. So first you're going to create a plan that does two things. It meets the site opportunities and constraints, dealing with the slopes, dealing with the exposures, and it also meets your use patterns. So it's going to take point number 1 and point number 2 and combine them into the plan that really works. And this is the meat kind of what we do, followed by the details. How tall is that wall going to be? How many candy tufts do I really need? Will they grow there? Get all those details right. And finally, build to match the installer's skill sets. So whether you're hiring somebody or whether you're doing it yourself, are they going to be able to execute your goal? Because the one thing we don't want is we don't want something that looks messy. We want it to look neat at the end of the day. And our definitions of neat may vary, but we need to meet our own definitions of neat to be satisfied with what we did.